While we're in town, let's see if we can find Pop Pop's hometown hero banner.
Where was it hanging last year?
It was down at the other end of Main Street.
Oh, it's coming up right now. Here it is.
My father, Michael Kazmersky, was born Tuesday, September 29, 1925. He grew up in Shamokin, a town nestled in the coal regions of northeastern Pennsylvania. Shamokin was founded in 1835 by coal speculators John Boyd and Ziba Bird. The town enjoyed but little existence until 1838, when the western section of Danville and Pottsville Railroad was completed. Shamokin developed into an anthracite coal mining center, reaching its peak between 1840 into the 1870s. The town grew in size to accommodate the influx of miners. In the early 20th century, coal mining was still a big part of the economy in Shamokin. Other industries had taken hold as well. Manufacturing of textiles and other goods employed many residents. My father was one of 9 children born to Veronica and John Kazmersky. As a young boy, my father also worked in the mines. He was in charge of carrying a canary cage. Canaries were used because they were very sensitive to changes in air quality. Miners were most worried about carbon monoxide, a hazardous gas, which frequently built up in the mines. His job was to watch the canary. If the canary showed any signs of distress, he was to alert the miners by blowing a whistle that hung from his neck. When he got a little older, he worked in the colliery, sorting coal from shale. As a teenager, he attended Coal Township High School, where he played football. He also continued to help the family by working at the Shamokin Dye Works. In March 1944, during his senior year of high school, my father and some of his classmates were drafted into the Navy.
Recruit Michael Kazmersky's first stop was the Naval Training Center in Bainbridge, Maryland.
The Bainbridge U.S. Naval Training Center was established in October of 1942. It was located at Fort Deposit, Maryland, on the Susquehanna River near the mouth of the Chesapeake Bay. President Roosevelt named the base after the former commander of the USS Constitution, William Bainbridge. The base was the first stop for enlisted men and served as a boot camp. Recruits were given a battery of tests to determine their educational and skill levels, then trained in ordnance, gunnery, seamanship, firefighting, physical training, and military drill. By the end of World War II, the center had trained over 244,000 recruits.
Mike graduated from Bainbridge Naval Training Center on April 19, 1944. Next up was the Naval Training Center in Newport, Rhode Island. Sailors here were given more in-depth training. Mike attended classes at the Navy War College and was posted on board the USS Constellation for quarters and training purposes.
In 1881, the Navy acquired Coasters Harbor Island on the Narragansett Bay from the state of Rhode Island. On June 4, 1883, the island became home to the Navy's first recruit training station. On October 6, 1884, the Naval War College was established on the island. The threat of a major war in 1940 saw the reactivation of shuttered parts of the base to house the many thousands of recruits soon to be trained at Newport. The USS Constellation has a long and storied history. The ship we see today, docked at the Baltimore Harbor, is a resurrection of the original ship by the same name. The Constellation was one of 6 ships authorized by Congress in 1794 to comprise the new United States Navy. Her name was derived from constellation of stars in their description of the official flag of the United States. In 1844, the old war-weary frigate was ordered to the Gosport Navy Yard at Portsmouth, Virginia, while her fate was being determined. By 1855, the Navy officially condemned her and ordered her to be dismantled. The Navy had petitioned Congress to have a new ship constructed in her place. Working under the subterfuge of repairs, the Navy actually began building a new ship about 100 yards from where the old ship was being dismantled. Some salvageable timbers from the old Constellation, particularly the ship's knees, were used in constructing the new vessel. On July 28, 1855, the new Constellation was put into service. On her initial voyage, she was dispatched to the Mediterranean to protect U.S. shipping interests. From 1859 to 1861, the Constellation was stationed off Africa to intercept slave ships. During the Civil War, she was used in the blockading of southern ports. On Christmas Day, 1864, the Constellation entered Chesapeake Bay and reported to the Navy Yard at Norfolk, Virginia, where she was used to house and train new recruits. In 1866, she was ordered to Philadelphia and eventually decommissioned in 1868. During the 1870s and 1880s, the Constellation was used as a floating classroom at the U.S. Naval Academy in Annapolis, Maryland. In 1894, she was transferred to Newport, Rhode Island, to be used as a training ship for enlisted personnel. On August 24, 1940, the Constellation was placed back into commission. Days later, she was designated Relief Flagship of Admiral Ernest King, commander of the Atlantic Fleet. This designation, while a great honor, was purely ceremonial as she continued her training duties at the War College at Newport, Rhode Island.
During May, June, and July of 1944, recruit Kazmersky continued his training at Newport, Rhode Island Naval Training Center. Although he was attached to the USS Constellation as his post, training and primary housing were held on Coasters Harbor Island. As the Constellation was the relief flagship of the Atlantic Fleet, the sailors, in addition to their training, took their turn in duties of routine daily maintenance and guard aboard the Constellation. As a tradition, each class had their picture taken with all of the sailors in dress white uniforms arranged throughout the sail rigging of the ship. In August of 1944, Mike was transferred to the Naval Training Center near Miami Beach, Florida. Here Mike was attached to the USS ATR-7, a seagoing rescue tug, for further training and deployment.
ATRs were wooden tugs originally designed to render emergency assistance to vessels disabled on the high seas in enemy submarine-infested coastal waters of the United States. It took 1 million board feet of timber to build each ATR-class ship, and was the last class to be almost entirely constructed of wood. They were extremely well equipped for towing and firefighting duties and had adequate salvaging capabilities. The ATR-7 was built by the Frank L. Sample Shipbuilding Company in Booth Bay Harbor, Maine, and commissioned on February 10, 1944. She had a very high and blunt bow of solid oak, reinforced with a large steel shield on the outside. On the forward deck was a 3-inch 50 caliber cannon. Above the gun deck stood the steel pilot house and bridge wings. The long fantail extended to the stern about 75 feet, only a few feet above sea level, a typical design for tow vessels. The ship's complement of crewmen was 32. She was propelled by 2 steam engines, a single propeller which produced approximately 1,600 horsepower.
The ship's duties while in Miami were to train officers and men for duty on similar type ships. This also included towing targets for other ships' gunnery practice and responding to rescue and salvage work as needed. On August 13, 1944, the ATR-7 was ordered to assist the Panamanian registered tanker SS Bostonian in distress off Fort Pierce, Florida. The tanker was carrying a load of highly flammable benzol, which was leaking fumes into her pump room. In their attempts to effect repairs, 2 crewmen had been killed. The ATR-7 attempted repairs without success and was finally ordered to escort the tanker to Key West, Florida. A month later, on September 15th, the USS ATR-7 was ordered to search for and assist the Army cargo ship FS-315 in the vicinity of the Bahama Islands after a recent hurricane. The FS-315 was located and towed back to Miami, Florida. After the hurricane of about October 18, 1944, the ATR-7 received a confidential dispatch from Fleet to assist U.S. freighter SS Fallcroft aground off the coast of Cuba. The crew of the Fallcroft had abandoned the ship. After several days of preliminary salvage work on October 24th, the job was handed over to a civilian salvage company. The ATR-7 had additional orders to proceed to the assistance of the Cuban Navy ship CS 4 de Septembre, also aground off the northern coast of Cuba. The CS 4 de Septembre appeared to be beyond salvage, so duties were confined to saving material on board. On October 28th, ATR-7 returned to Miami, Florida, and resumed the duties of training personnel. On November 1, 1944, Mike and his crewmates were given a commendation for their work on the stranded ships USS Fallcroft and CS 4 de Septembre. January 15 saw the last training cruise in Miami. The ATR-7 was ordered by Com-4th Fleet to proceed to the Navy Yard at Charleston, South Carolina. By Wednesday, January 17, the ATR-7 was standing in Charleston Harbor and moored next to the USS Narragansett. From there, she was put into dry dock for cleaning and painting of her hull. On the morning of January 31, the ATR-7 was underway en route from Charleston, South Carolina to the 4th Fleet operating around Trinidad, BWI. In compliance with confidential orders from COM's 6th Naval District, duties to include towing of targets for the United States and Brazilian navies and miscellaneous work. Late that afternoon, several test rounds of the 3-inch 50 caliber and 20mm ammunition were fired. ATR-7 continued south toward their destination unescorted in compliance with orders. The ATR-7 entered the channel to the U.S. Naval Air Station Port of Spain, Trinidad, BWI, British West Indies, on February 6, 1945. Here, minor repairs were made to the main engine. On February 8th, enlisted passengers along with depth charges and 3-inch 50 caliber ordnance was brought on board. On February 9th, the ATR-7 was ordered to the U.S. Naval Base in Recife, Brazil. ATR-7 continued on its route south by southeast en route to Brazil. The crew was busy with general quarters drill on a daily basis. Gunnery practice was also had on February 13th, firing the 3-inch 50 caliber, 20mm guns, and depth charges. On February 14th, 1945 at 1200 hours, or noon Eastern Time, the ATR-7 crossed the equator.
The ceremony of crossing the line, as it's called, is an initiation rite that commemorates a sailor's first crossing of the equator. These ceremonies are presided over by King Neptune, whom is the ranking sailor who has already crossed, and his court. Once crossed, a sailor is termed a shellback. The innocent green sailors are called pollywogs until they appear before the court of King Neptune and Davy Jones. The ceremony includes a reading of offenses, shouting, and playing tricks on the pollywogs, such as cutting of hair, spraying with salt water from fire hoses, and paddling as the pollywogs run a gauntlet.
Subpoena and summons. The Royal High Court of the Raging Main, domain of Neptunus Rex, to whom may come these great, presents greetings and beware. Whereas the good ship ATR-7, bound south of the equator, is about to enter our domain, and the aforesaid ship carries a large and slimy cargo of landlubbers, beachcombers, gutter rats, sea lawyers, lounge lizards, parlor Dunnigans, tile deserters, park bench warmers, chicken chasers, Broadway Romeos, Coney Island sand crabs, far flushers, Staten Island worms, and all other creatures of the land. And last but not least, he cows, he vamps, and liberty hounds falsely masquerading as seamen, of which low scum you are a member, having never appeared before us And whereas the Royal Court of the Raging Main will convene on board the good ship ATR-7 on the 15th of February 1945 at 30 degrees east longitude and 0 degrees latitude. And an inspection of our high royal roster shows that it is high time the sad and wandering nautical souls of that much abused body of yours appear before the high tribunal of Neptune. And be it known that we do hereby summon and command you, Michael A. Kazmersky, now a Seaman First Class, United States Navy, to appear before the Royal High Court at such time as may best suit our royal pleasure, to accept most heartily and with good grace the pains and penalties of the awful tortures that will be inflicted upon you. You will be examined as to the fitness to become one of our trusty shellbacks and to answer the following charges. Charge number 1. In that Michael A. Kazmersky, now a Seaman First Class, United States Navy, willfully and maliciously failed to show reference and allegiance to our royal person, and is therein a vile landlubber and pollywog. Charge number 2, attempting to cross up the recruiting office with a name like Kazmersky. Charge number 3, comparing the Constellation with the mighty USS ATR-7. Disobey this summons under pain of our swift and terrible displeasure. Our vigilance is ever wakeful. Our vengeance is just and sure. A test for the King, Davy Jones, majestic scribe, Neptunus Rex, ruler of the raging main.
Mainland Brazil was sighted on February 17th as the ship was piloted into the port of Recife Naval Station, where she was moored for minor voyage repairs. Towing jobs were scarce in Brazil. Most of ATR-7's days were spent moored next to a small tanker at the dock, and time passed slowly, with the usual humdrum routine. The U.S. Navy had turned over to the Brazilian Navy 2 nearly new destroyer escorts, so one of the few times targets were needed to be towed was once the Brazilians were instructed on operation of those ships and they were ready for sea trials.
Small ships like the ATR-7 did not qualify for a movie projector. However, through the base or another visiting ship, they were treated to a movie set up on the dock. The movie was Saludos Amigos by Walt Disney, and it was in color. The movie was produced for the U.S. Department of Defense to foster better Pan-American relations during the war. In the story, Donald Duck and his friends go on holiday around Brazil.
On March 1, 1945, the USS ATR-7 was ordered to assist the U.S. tanker SS Providence in distress off the northeast coast of Brazil because of loss of rudder. Together with the USS Chain ARS-20, the SS Providence was safely towed to Fortaleza, Brazil, reaching port on March 7.
The ATR-7 was fitted with one 3-inch 50 caliber cannon and two 20mm guns. The guns were fired on a semi-routine basis during General Quarters drill. The following is an account of this exercise from a yeoman second class. The first time this yeoman saw the crew fire the 3-inch 50 caliber was a jolting experience. The yeoman was stationed on the flying bridge wearing a headset to relay orders to the captain. The captain called orders to the gun crew. The barrel of the gun would slowly move upward, pointing to the sky. The end of the barrel was about 15 feet away from the yeoman. The captain shouted, "Fire!" and in a split second, an orange flash with bluish smoke appeared as the gun discharged. The blast from the gun wrapped the dungarees around the yeoman's legs. Boy, that was a shock.
Being on a smaller naval ship, it is almost certain that Mike was trained in at least the support of the 3-inch 50 caliber cannon on board the ATR-7. That would be the only reason for him to be within close proximity to the gun under firing conditions. As it happened, and the exact date is unknown, at one point Mike was subjected to the blast from the cannon, to the point where he needed medical evaluation. The medical services at Knox Field Hospital were not sufficient to properly diagnose his damaged eyes due to the concussion from the 3-inch .50 caliber cannon. On March 20, 1945, Mike was transferred off the ATR-7 to Brazil and then stateside. In March of 1945, after sea duty aboard the USS ATR-7, Mike was transferred to the Naval Hospital at Key West and eventually to the Naval Hospital in Bethesda, Maryland. He was diagnosed and treated for detached retinas in both of his eyes. Through his course of treatment, he recovered full sight in only one eye. His hospital stay spanned 10 months. Mike was discharged from the Navy on January 18, 1946. After his discharge from the Navy, Mike returned to Shamokin and soon picked up his old job at the Shamokin Dye Works. Over the next few years, Mike and his buddies played semi-pro football for the Shamokin Anthracite Maroons in the Eastern Division of the Pennsylvania Professional Football League. They also traveled the state visiting state parks, took bus trips to New York and Philadelphia to watch Major League Baseball games, and generally enjoyed life after serving in the Navy. In 1950, Mike met Betty Picciola, and life took a different turn. Mike and Betty married on September 26, 1953, and honeymooned in New York City. Soon they moved to Williamsport, where Mike worked at Lycoming Motors. Chasing better jobs found Mike and Betty in Philadelphia, and eventually in 1957 they bought a house in Lansdale, Pennsylvania, where Mike worked for Standard Press Steel in Jenkintown as a machinist. Mike eventually rose to be an operator of a 2-level 3/4-inch bolt-making machine. He was so skilled at this job, SPS sent Mike to plants in Puerto Rico, Mexico, and Cleveland, Ohio, to train operators on the big bolt-making equipment. Mike and Betty soon had children, daughter Judy, daughter Jean, and twin son John, who sadly passed away as an infant. Mike was a long-time member of the Loyal Order of the Moose Lansdale chapter and the Lithuanian Club in Shamokin. He was an avid bowler for years, winning several awards. In 1992, Mike retired after 35 years at Standard Press Steel.